we want to first mention our two presenters. And what we're going to be hearing is we're going to hear a video first, and then we're going to hear presentation by both Min Zhao and Carol Lee. And Min is an award-winning journalist, filmmaker, and educator, and she's created documentaries on Chinese American and Asian American history, and including Voices Chinese Women of the Delta. And we're going to be hearing a lot of that today. And she also has done in 2024 a PBS documentary, Valor and Memory. And she's a frequent speaker about immigrant stories. And Carol Lee trained as a dental hygienist and was actually the first Chinese American president of the California Dental Hygienist Association. And then in retirement, has become a community leader, historian, and board member of the Locke Foundation. And you're going to be interested to hear what that is. And especially people from Southern California and elsewhere who don't know about Locke, and co-founder of the nonprofit Locke Prior Residents, Descendants, and Ascendants. And she, as is Min, dedicated to preserving Chinese American history and has been a contributor to oral history projects and Voices Chinese Women of the Delta. So without any further ado, we'll start with Min. And so nice to have you here today. Thank you for coming.
Hi, everyone.
Well, we're looking forward to it.
Okay, so I have been asked a lot of times, why would I make this documentary about the Chinese women, you know? I always share that the origin my inspiration came from China Mary, who I met her story, about 5 years ago. So on this night, you will see actually there were three China Marys. They all inspired me a lot. But one of them gave me very special attention. Who's on the left corner, left down corner, the China Mary from Evanston, Wyoming. He's quoted as a toast of her countrymen, lived to be 100 years old. And from this picture, you can also see the the right picture was China Mary of Sita, Alaska. And the upper left was a China Mary of Oakdale, California. Well, I'm sure you can meet a lot of China Mary in other states, Wyoming, Colorado, or even some far states. The China Mary from Evanston, Wyoming gives me most of the inspiration for this film you just watched. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, I'm telling you a little bit more about this China Mary from Evanston, Wyoming. And this Chinese woman, his name was likely Ai Yun. Why I say likely? Just because we don't know her real name yet. And back then, I mean, in the 19th century or even longer before 19th century, Chinese people didn't carry, especially the women, didn't carry their real names. Even from not lots of historical records, you can barely see their real names. But Irene was one of those women, we can see she's so nameless. She emigrated from Guangdong province, most likely in 1960s, um, probably before 1964, which was the year when the European War happened. So Ai Yun was one of the best-known Chinese women in early Wyoming history. You can imagine how remote, how barren Wyoming was back in the early and middle of 19th century. Okay, next slide, please. This picture shows how the Evanston, Wyoming looks like in 1960s, in 1860s. Back then, the Union Pacific Railroad just reached the remote west town, and you can see this town. Well, people drive carriages, and it looks like a typical western remote town. and Ayun just relocated here from somewhere else. Her journey, her journey stops in Evanston, and this turns out her destination. And yeah, please, next night. This picture shows Irene when she was old, and from some archives, I can see that she was credited with unusual beauty when she was young. However, when she get old, her life turned out to be kind of miserable because she was living in poverty. Irene actually moved to Evanston around 1900. She um when she got married for 3 times, and by the time when she got old, she didn't have any sources of income, so she charged the tourists like 10 cents for photograph with them, because she was kind of well-known woman in the town. So she can got this sum of money and pay her livings, and pay the boys catching fish for her, from the Bear River. Well, that's a way how she lived. That's how I learned from the archives about her later life. Okay, later, please. Next slide. This picture is what I get from archives, which shows Irene's third marriage. You can obviously see her third husband was much younger than her. It was true. So Ayun actually, before she moved to Evanston, Wyoming, she lived in San Francisco, Denver, Park City, Utah, and wherever there is uh, she could. She ran a china shop with her husband. We don't know which husband. She ran a china shop, but by the time she lived in Evanston, she married this person who's much younger than her. I believe that wasn't a marriage of happiness, but most likely it was a marriage of necessity. Just like the film you saw, those old Chinese women, in old times, they had to marry some people for living, love for happiness. And they didn't have the right to choose their marriage yet. So for Ayun, back to Ayun, she in 1968, she witnessed the violent Bear River City riot while working as a cook for railroad laborers. Well, if you check back the history and archives of the Bear River City riot, you would see that was brutal. The Chinese people were chased out, they were killed, for the women, for the men, but Ayun didn't leave. She stayed. She stayed in Evanston until the last minute of her life and became an icon of the town history. That was amazing. Next slide, please. This is Ayun's gravestone. She's buried in Evanston City Cemetery. Um, Though her grave is in purple section, the city provided a permanent marker for her. But from the marker, you can see her name, Ayun. Even Ayun was a likely name. You can't see her name. You just see a China Mary. I think this is a mark for all those Chinese pioneer women. They dare to risk their life, survived in remote area places. Uh, fighting any possible battles in their life to survive and to be themselves. And I saw a road named after Ayun, the China Mary. The road named China Mary Road in her honor in Evanston. That's the only thing I can see in this town to feel her, and know she did exist and lived in this town. Next slide, please. Back to San Francisco. In 19th century, San Francisco Chinatown was very prosperous. However, behind those prosperity, lots of Chinese women, paid their sacrifice and costs. From the picture, you can see those Chinese women or even girls, they survived. They survived from human trafficking. They survived to being forced as prostitute. And from your left picture, you can see the local people how they raid the Chinese brothels and save some girl like that, carrying them down from the high buildings. So those are the stories we never, or we probably we didn't have, never paid attention to, paid enough attention to them. Those women's girls, survived in the shadows. They were voiceless. Nobody cared about their sufferings. Well, this is something struck me deeply, deeply. And by the way, those pictures came from um, a book by Judy Young, and she was also a pioneer Chinese woman, and she grew up in San Francisco, Chinatown, and she was such a historian. But unluckily, but unfortunately, I didn't have a chance to meet her before because she passed away before I could, met her. But from the book she wrote, I can see so much rich history never been touched enough or deep enough. And next slide, please. Well, um, I love to see this picture because they're so colorful, they're so sunny. And I remember the day when we took the picture in the pear orchard in Locke, and right next to the town of Locke. Suni, Collis Suni to your left, the lady named Collis Suli, and Carol to your left. They were two dreamers. When I first met them, I was like, I feel like they were like me, making dreams all the time. And three of us sat together one day, talk about this. And I just asked them if they are interested in to let me digging their family stories and to probably make a documentary out of their family history. And they were so open to me. And three of us just decided to do it. So that's the beginning of our film. And that was the spring in 2022. That was the first first spring I started to film the orchids, the pear blossoming, and I'm glad I did that. Way before we proposed, we have funding to do this film. Just because I thought if I missed one spring, I would probably miss a whole year. So that's why I had no time to waste. I just jumped in my car, drove to the Delta, and started filming there. And that day, two ladies joined me in the orchard, the pear orchard. Well, that's a lovely moment. Okay, next slide, please. From this picture, you can see a Connie King. Connie King was called the Knock Mom, the amazing woman in the town of Locke. And I didn't have chance to meet her in person either. She passed away. She passed away way, way earlier when I had the chance to film in Locke. However, she left her toilet garden behind. From the picture on the upright, you will see how the toilet garden looks like today. And from those toilets were abandoned by the local residents, especially local white people, because they thought that was junk left by the Chinese. They hate to keep those toilets. However, Connie just had such a bravery, courage, and inspiration to turn those toilets into garden, to plant the flowers, green um, green plants into out of those toilets. And that makes me think in this way. Those Chinese women like Connie had such creativity and courage to turn everything bad into everything good. That's how their life was. And my guess was so true. Next slide, please. Lucy Young. I remember when I interviewed her, she just turned 102 years old. And I remember the summer afternoon when I started my interviewing her in her room. She was watching a golf game. She used to do golf games and with her friend. And her husband was also served in U.S. military, served in World War II. So the two medals, congressional gold medals, were for them, for both of them. So from the two gold medals, we can see Ruth Young, back then a fighter, a soldier in World War II, shared the same honor and sacrifice and contributions with the men. And even though she didn't get much recognition back then. Okay, next slide, please. Daisy Marr. Every time when I saw her picture smiling, and I can't stop thinking her beautiful garden. That was a garden I have filmed like 3 or 4 times, in different seasons. Well, that was her battlefield. Also, her battlefield, like other women's, was the kitchen. So upright corner, you can see the picture I took with her in her kitchen. That was the place I did the interviews. It was small, but it was full of memories, even though some of the memories were so dark. Sitting in that kitchen, small kitchen, she recalled how her grandma committed suicide, how her uncle committed suicide later on. Those sad stories struck me deeply, deeply, because they paid the cost as the earlier immigrants to this country. And we never stopped there. She moved away, with so much burden, but moved on with so much mission also. She built up the first community lotus garden, lotus pond, and turned a waste pond into a lotus pond. You would say, how beautiful it was and how meaningful it was. And I accidentally stopped by that lotus pond one day before I even knew her. And I think this is kind of destiny for me to finish this film. Okay, next slide, please. Well, yeah, from the upright corner, you will see the picture of the lotus pond I just mentioned. Unfortunately, it was not so many lotus right now because the pond was reverted to was drained out for the maintenance. But you can see how happy Daisy was with her husband, a white man she met at uh, San Jose State University. Well, they had a very happy life. I think from her smile, I can feel the joys of life, even though many of her families, like her grandma, her mother, her father, paved the way for her. But she's part of the history too. Okay, next slide, please. Lily. Lily was, I bet Lily must be the oldest narrator, if I'm correct. Well, when I asked her if she can be my narrator in this film, she accepted it. That amazed me a lot because I think even though given the 96 years old, the age, she uh, she's so amazing. She can tell everything of her mother naturally. And it's like she's kind of a time machine. It just takes me easily back to the time when she was little. So I like her narration so much. Yeah, Kara and I have worked a long time with her, back and forth to make corrections of every narration lines. And Lady also help us to better understand the history. And she's open. She's so open to her family history. By the way, Lady was younger sister of Lucy Jiang, the soldier in World War II. Those two older sisters are amazing people I ever met in my life. And Lily also fed me so well. Every time when I finish an interview, she always bring me the fresh fruits from her garden or from her labors, and she always prepare some snacks for me and to take away. And I'm so grateful for her support in producing this film. Next slide, please. Penny. Penny Lee Peterson, I call her my grandma. Why? Because she's so open to me, so caring, so loving. And I, you know, I filmed her about 3 times. Once in her home, once in the town of Locke, from the west end to the east end. Well, she just amazing. She took me to the building where her old house, family house was. It was still there, by the way. It was the second building in the town of Locke, and she shared her memories, or even sometimes I feel like what she shared with me was kind of gossips, the gossips with the decades ago. But when some of the gossips came out from her, it reminds me of the harsh time those Chinese women lived. For example, she told me one lady was told she better she better die herself by jumping into the river because she was raped. She was raped by a white man in this town. So I couldn't finalize. I couldn't find enough proof who this woman is, and Penny would never release the woman's information to me either. But I just feel like it was kind of life they suffered. Okay, next slide, please. Well, so out of those stories, memories they shared with me, I made this film, Voices, Chinese Women of the Delta. I think this is the first time to give a voice of those voiceless Chinese women in the Delta. And it's just also a beginning of my exploration to the history also. So without many support and help from my friends, I can't make this happen. So I'm so grateful for each of the support my friends gave me. And for the audience I have never met before, I encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, History Channel for Chinese Americans. Yeah, if you subscribe my channel, you would see I post some clips of my productions before, and I promise I will post more. And I would turn to next time to Carol, my partner in producing this film, and also a historian. Well, Carol, that's your turn.
Carol, we're looking forward to yours, and you're going to tell us about the Locke Foundation. And so far, I think I can speak for everyone that this is a wonderful presentation that we're listening to today. Carol, unmute your.
So my presentation is next, please. So my presentation begins with, some people don't know where Locke is. So it is in the Sacramento River Delta. And if you look at the picture on the left and you see the San Francisco, when the Chinese came, they actually went through San Francisco, through all that waterway. And you look up at the top and you see Sacramento. So before Sacramento is Locke. And so that's where they would have had to travel to get to the Delta. And at the time when the Chinese initially came, this was all swampland. So it has since become fertile, rich farmland and the farm to fork capital of the California, of the region, and maybe even of the world. Next. In this slide, you see it says Lee's Market. That's where I would say all my memories, and especially of my mother, come from. I am telling this story because it's not just a Chinese story. It's not just the women's story. It is the story of American history. And so it is a shared history. I am Cantonese, and from Zhongshan, my father and mother, they went to Locke. Well, actually, my grandfather came to Locke in 1912, and then my mother came in the 30s and lived with one of the cousins that came when my grandfather came. We left, and then eventually we came back. Next. The immigrants that came were seeking opportunity and fleeing much turmoil, hardship there, intolerable famine, civil and political unrest. And so they heard this hopeful place of Gamsan, Gold Mountain, in 1918, and they left the men. The men left their families and to seek opportunity. Other opportunities included the Transcontinental Railroad when Abraham Lincoln, after the Civil War, enacted a railroad act that united, his vision was to unite the East and the West of the US. And so that was what that was intended to do. In the Delta, the Chinese, after the gold rush, and the gold waned, a lot of them also went into agriculture, and they found the Sacramento River Delta to be quite familiar because it was just like the Pearl River Delta of southern China where they came from. And so in the Delta, there are many diaspora. And so next. I don't, the word immigration, when you hear it, you don't know, but if you spelled it with an E, it would be like that first group that you see in the foreground. They look a little raggedy and desperate almost to have come for the opportunities. One man, kind of on the center top, he still has his queue, his braid. And that would have been, if he's going back home, like all these probably intended to do, you needed that queue to be able to go back and be part of the Qing dynasty that required it. The people in the back, you look, and there are more than just men. There are women and children, and so it's a different wave, a different group of Chinese that then came and intended to stay with an I. Immigration, immigrants. Next. As soon as they came, they experienced discrimination, systematic and legalized even. So there was already a sentiment of anti-Chinese movement in the 1850s for the foreign minor tax that happened, that was levied against the miners, the Chinese miners. During the railroad, if you look at any of the iconic photographs of the Transcontinental Railroad and the promontory point where the two railroads met, you won't see any Chinese in those photographs. And yet 10,000 or more Chinese worked on that western region. And that would have been, by the second year, 90% of the workforce was Chinese. The first year, they were only part of it, but all the other groups dropped out. And so, except for 10%, most of them were Chinese. They worked very hard, and the hardships, I can't even imagine enduring. Every day, summer, winter, fall. Did I forget one? Anyway, all seasons, all conditions, and it was only about an inch a day that they broke through the granite walls. So, and not to be represented is really something. But more importantly, I think the two legislations that people should focus on is first the Page Act. It was the first U.S. government targeted ethnic discrimination legalized. It was, the Page Act was before the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act. It was in 1875. And if you target women, what happens, they attack their morality. Oh, they're prostitutes and all that kind of stuff. And so if you target women and they don't come, you don't have women to produce babies and families that come. So it was quite an effort, and maybe that didn't quite work. So they then went to the 1882 Exclusion Act, which affected generations over more than 60 years. Next. in the Delta, the Swampland Act that actually was passed in 1850 affected the Chinese in the Delta more like 1870. And so the Chinese were there. That particular legislation allowed states, any state, to take wasteland and improve it for agriculture. So that was perfect for what the Chinese did in the Delta. I have lots of numbers, and one of them is more than 300,000 acres. I've heard numbers higher than that were cleared and levees created so that there could be rich and fertile farmland. But for all their improvement and efforts, they could not own the land. And so as much as they reclaimed it, they were only allowed to manage it and be part of the workforce. But women were also part of that workforce, a major part of that workforce. They worked in the processing and production of the fruits and vegetables. So in the canneries, in the packing sheds, and they even worked in the orchards and fields. Next. Oh, wait. So that building that you see at the bottom is actually the packing shed that is on the west side of Locke. It spans longer than the town of Locke. Next. This is an example of along the river, all the different diaspora and Chinese that worked on the land, ranched, sharecropper, tenant farmers, all of that after they reclaimed it. Next. I like this picture because it's actually Penny's picture, Penny Lee Peterson. And this picture is a great example of 1912 Lockport. So Lockport was pre-dated Locke. And so in the time of commerce and tourism, Lockport had a wharf. And that meant that they could have river traffic and the river boats. They also had a railroad that came through the edge of that river road. So there were passengers, there was produce, and 3 Chinese merchants, one of which, so the first one opened a saloon and store. And if you look at the picture, you see that little X that's part of the sign for the railroad. Just above that is where the saloon and store would have been, just across from this big building, which is the second building, Lockport Hotel at the top. So it accommodated the labor force that might have come, the tourism that might have come. There's also on the main level a dry good, and the lower level, which may be visible, but it would have been below street level, below the levee road, and that was where the family lived. And naturally, the third building would have been gambling. Next. So Walnut Grove was where mainly the most of concentration of Chinese were. And there was a Chinese section, a Japanese section. It actually was the microcosm of agriculture. And so in the Chinese section, which is the first wave of people that came, the picture on the left is one of the rare pictures of what Walnut Grove used to be. There aren't very many. And so this one I found. And this building, probably from the architecture and the front of it, is a gambling establishment. Anyway, in 1915, Walnut Grove, Chinatown burned down. Next, it was made up of 2 groups of people, one from Zhongshan and the other one from Toisan. when the fire happened, the Toisan stayed to rebuild, and the Zhongshan moved to Lok. So in Lok, what happened was at that time it was still Lockport, and someone named George Locke owned it. So there was a negotiation, and he rented the land to the Chinese, but they did not intend to stay. Next. I took this picture on the right, the colorful one, not too long ago, well, within a month or so. And the one on the left is from maybe 1920. And so you look, and Lok isn't much different. This is the business section of Lok. Next. And this is an overall picture from the back of Lok. So in the foreground, you'll see an empty space, but if you look carefully, it is where the Chinese women, really it was the Chinese women who cultivated the ground, the garden. This was their garden to sustain their families and community, because they shared. If you grew something and I didn't, then we'd share it. And everybody, this was a community. And so I like that about this picture too. The next layer up, those buildings are the residential area. And to the right is that taller building in the middle there is, or on the right side, is actually a church. It's actually a Baptist mission. It's not a church. And beyond that is the next layer, which would have been Main Street. So there's maybe one residential street and one Main Street. And so you can identify Main Street by that building that has the little peak above it, the tower above it, which is actually a very interesting thing because Chinese had much ingenuity. And this building is called the Star Theater. It had Cantonese Chinese opera in its first, when it first opened, and it had gambling at the bottom. But that little peak at the top is like Chinese air conditioning. You know, all the hot air in the Delta rises and gets drafted up and vented out there. Across the very back, you will see the packing shed, and it spans more than the length of, or at least the length of Lok. Next. So Lok has a very distinctive designation. In 1990, it was designated as the largest and most intact surviving example of a historic rural Chinese American community in the United States. This is the one. And so it isn't a Chinatown. It is actually a Chinese town. And so that means that there are no other towns that it is in. It stands alone. And if you like, you know, an example in contrast would be San Francisco, where San Francisco has its city, and in the middle somewhere there is a Chinatown. All right, so if you went there way back when, you would be able to speak just Chinese, one of the Zhongshan dialects, and you would be understood. It was a self-sustaining community, and the name Lok from George Locke, Chinese have this way of spelling it out to pronounce it. And so in the dialect, one of the dialects, I might say it Lokku, but another dialect that maybe is more familiar to the Chinese Lok community, that would be Loki. And so if you saw the characters, it means happy place, the Chinese characters. But there was also gambling and speakeasies and prostitutes and brothels, that kind of stuff in its heyday. But we're going to talk about the residents in the back of Lok. Next. These are them. These are the women. I found this picture after I showed it to someone. They said, this is a rare picture because these are the women of the original women of Lok. Voiceless, forgotten, And pretty much they followed the men to come. They raised the families. They maintained much more than the household. They had to survive in a lot of ways, and you heard some of the stories, but they were certainly marginalized. Next. And so the reason why I say they were marginalized is because certainly outside of Locke, there was a lot of discrimination. However, many of these women never experienced it because they never even left Locke. They didn't know what that was like. So within Locke, there was another discrimination, and that was the Chinese discrimination socially and culturally. It was a patriarchal society. And so it's all about the boy. You know, you have a Gapo, a genealogy book. It's all about the boy. The girls aren't even mentioned. And if they are, it's not for much. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about the transcendence of hardship, and next, please, the survival and thriving of some of these women. So Harry Sen talked about his mother who didn't get an education. And so she was smarter than those brothers. She was more business savvy. She was very fiercely independent and actually progressive. She loved fishing, cooking. She was great. Gardening, you can't beat her garden. So she passed on to Harry. Next. Penny Lee Peterson. You heard about her generations of, actually, you may not have heard, but she has generations of history because she has, her father is one of 13 or 15 children and one of the first. So after he passed, there are many aunties and uncles that have stories that she could tell. So she was part of the part of the Li and the Aoyang clans. And so nowadays she's adventuring with her son Chip, and soon she will be traveling to Hawaii to celebrate her aunt's 100-year birthday. Next. Daisy's mom is what I wanted to talk about, and Daisy talks about her as being unstoppable. She had lots of potential, but certainly no opportunity, minimal, limited opportunity. But Daisy talks about her being the Chinese Martha Stewart. She foraged for mushrooms. She knew how to butcher a deer, and an amazing cook and creative at that. So this picture is of her and all the kids, some of the kids, trying to cook in kind of the winter and in a camping setting. Next. Okay, everybody asked about Ruth Jang. She is now 103. So what's that secret to longevity? She's over here playing MJ. And I love this picture because of the hands. Everybody is together and mixing it all up. And these hands are part of that community and sense of family that she has. So she was a sports enthusiast. Tennis and golf were her main things, and she still watches that. So if you said she lives with her daughter, the two of them live together, and if her daughter said, "Oh, let's go out shopping," she's right there. If one day I was over there and she said, Gwen said, "Oh, let's go for ice cream," and she was ready. Next. Connie Chan Robeson. You saw her at the schoolhouse. And so there was a lot of disconnect between the Western world and the world that she came into when I think she was under 10. So she was displaced. She was alienated from her friends, and she was isolated, but she had a community in Locke. This community of elders was certainly embraced and adopted her because she was the last family that came. And so they loved her and her brother's energy. And so she was loved. And from that, she talks about the grandmas and grandpas, they really impacted her. So currently, she is the director of a nonprofit that deals with young adults, transitioning them and providing social services. Next. This is my mom. I saved her for last because I might get emotional. She came in the 1930s as a paper daughter. If you wanted to ask about that later, that's fine. But when they moved out of Locke, when she moved out of Locke, she moved to San Francisco and worked in the Mare Island Naval Shipyard. So that's her as a welder. And she taught herself English. So it was very cute. She had a little accent, but she was a lifelong learner. So one time I drove her to do some business. And so she was going to do it herself, and she's talking English and stuff. And I looked over and I heard a word come out of her mouth, and we get back into the car and drive home. And I said, "Hey, Mom, where did you, how did you know that word?" And she said, "I heard it." And what she did is she probably heard it, and then she listened again and again until she heard it enough that she felt comfortable using it. And she always used every word that she learned. So she was independent, resilient. I would say she was quite optimistic, a gentle but strong person. And in that picture that you saw of the store, that was her world. She was compassionate and kind and generous, and she could manifest that there. So next.
Carol, we're coming to the end of and here is the end. This is just perfect timing, Carol.
I want to thank you all for your interest and being here.
Okay. Carol, thank you so much. And I was about to tell you we're coming to the end, and we are at the end. So thank you so much. We loved this presentation, this, I would think, very important presentation by you and Min. And it couldn't have been more important to talk about women's voices in the Chinese Delta, particularly as we talked earlier about the patriarchal Chinese society. Here we're hearing women's voices, a very important session. And what I'm sure I'm speaking for everyone that we just enjoyed this enormously. And the only bad part is that we're not going to have time for questions from the audience, but feel free to try to write them down, and we'll try to answer separately afterwards. And I want to thank everyone for attending, and I want to thank Min and Carol for this very important work that they've been doing. That I mean, we all just loved it. Muting, could you show us the next two talks over the next couple of months? I want to just remind everyone of what's coming up. First, we're going to have Monty Ham talk in June about the Chinese American involvement in the here it is in the Vietnam War back in the 60s and 70s. And then in July, we're going to hear about the Peranakan. Again, we've actually had one for those faithful listeners. They've heard one. And we're going to hear more, and it's going to be just a lot of fun. And again, I want to thank everyone for tuning in. This has just been a wonderful session, and you guys have done wonderful research, and you've recorded these voices from the past. Many of the people have passed away. And I wonder if at this point, besides saying goodbye to everyone, we might ask the principals to stay on for no more than 5 more minutes so as to chat about the session. I just think it was absolutely wonderful. Are there any other final thoughts by either Min or Carol?
Happy Mother's Day.
Oh, and happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Exactly. And Afina, our high school student, had to leave early to buy flowers for her mother. So it's just a wonderful weekend. I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their weekend. Okay. And I want to say bye-bye to everyone, and we'll just stay on for a couple